The thermostat sat like a shrine on the wall of our hallway, cold, white, and silent. It glowed 68 every day, all year, winter, summer, fall, it didn't matter. It's the optimal temperature. He'd say energy efficient, not too hot, not too cold, perfect, and so was he. Or so he made sure I thought. I used to joke about it. Back when joking was allowed, can we go up just 2 degrees, I'm freezing, he'd smile tightly. As if I'd told a risky joke at a formal dinner party. That's psychological. Drink some warm tea, and I did, every day for 7 years. At first, it was charming. Sam was a man of routines. He meal prepped on Sundays, had an Excel file for every budget, and even kept a calendar of light bulb replacements. When we moved into the house, this 2-story modern thing with steel banisters and nothing but shades of gray, he told me, "This is a home for people who think straight." I wasn't sure what that meant. I nodded anyway. We met at a business seminar downtown. I was assisting the catering team, making $17 an hour on dreaming about maybe going back to school. He wore a charcoal suit and never looked at me directly until the chicken skewers ran out. "You ran out of protein," he'd said. "Guess you're stuck with spinach rolls." I replied. He smiled. And that was it. The first year he bought me books he liked. The second year, he told me which friends were wasting my time. The third year, he suggested I quit my job and manage the house instead, a full-time position. He called it. In year 4, I stopped looking at the thermostat entirely. It wasn't just the air he monitored, he controlled the noise levels. TV under 30 volume, please. The pantry inventory, we already have enough paprika. And even my wardrobe, you look best in neutrals, less distracting. But it always came back to the thermostat. One night, in early December, I did it. I walked over in my wool socks and gently, like a thief afraid to wake the dog, tapped the little dial until it said 70. I waited. It was quiet, too quiet. Then came the voice from the living room. "Why did you change it?" I froze. I couldn't even blame a draft or say it was an accident. My fingers still hovered near the glass screen. I was cold. I said, "Silence, I see." He finally muttered, "Well, it's back to 68. He walked by me and tapped it back down. Smooth and swift, like he was sealing a wound. He didn't raise his voice. Sam never did. That would be inefficient. The next morning, my favorite mug was gone. I asked. He didn't answer. 2 days later, the books I'd borrowed from the library, romance novels I knew he disapproved of, were missing from the nightstand. "Maybe you misplaced them," he said. "Things tend to disappear when your mind is cluttered." By the 5th year, I stopped inviting people over altogether. They'd always ask the same thing. "Why is it so cold in here?" I'd laugh. "Oh, Sam likes it that way." I stopped noticing how strange that sounded until year 6. That winter, I found an old quilt in the back of the upstairs closet. My grandmother had hand-stitched it, royal blues and honey golds. It smelled like cedar and faint soap. I wrapped myself in it when he wasn't home, but I always folded it up and tucked it back before he returned. He liked things minimal. Blankets were clutter, so were candles, paintings, doormats with quotes, and anything else that distracted from clarity. He called it optimizing. I called it erasure. Something shifted the week my sister called. "Emily," she said, "you sound tired. Is everything okay?" I didn't know how to answer. Was I tired? Maybe, or just quiet. "You learn to shrink your voice when it's never the right pitch." "Everything's fine," I said, and my own words felt like cardboard. She visited the next day, unannounced. Sam hated unannounced. He greeted her like he greeted everyone, with polite distance and rapid eye blinks. After she left, he didn't say anything for 2 days. On the 3rd day, the kettle disappeared. I didn't mention it. I just microwaved water and told myself not to need things too much. That's when the idea came. It started as a whisper, then a seed, then a plan. Not revenge, not even rebellion. Just heat. The day I turned up the thermostat for real, I did it at 3:42 p.m. He always arrived home at 5:15 sharp. I set it to 7 for. Then I turned on the oven and baked lemon cookies. Just for the smell, I lit candles. I wrapped myself in the quilt and played jazz on the Bluetooth speaker, something with a saxophone and woman's voice that soared like a bird finally untethered. I even wore red lipstick. I didn't hide anything. He walked in, stopped, and sniffed the air like a man walking into a house that had been rearranged. "What's going on?" he asked. "It's warm," I said. "Isn't that nice?" His jaw worked the way it always did when he didn't like something. "You're being irrational." No, I said, I'm being warm. He moved toward the thermostat like a reflex. I stepped in front of it. His face tightened. But he didn't shout, he never shouted. That was the scariest part. We have rules, he said. I don't. That was the moment I realized I could say no and the world wouldn't collapse. Maybe just his. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. Not with words. Anyway, instead, the silence grew thick and tight. Like the inside of a jar that had never been opened. He moved through the house with the precision of a predator. Quiet steps. Deliberate door closures. I could hear the air vents kicking in. Cold again. Always cold. But something had changed. He hadn't turned it back to 68. He hadn't touched it at all. On the 3rd day, I found the thermostat reset to 66. Petty, I smiled. He was trying to make a point, but so was I. I turned it back to 74. Then left the house. I drove around in my old car for hours. The heater was broken, ironically. The air coughed dust and the stereo made a clicking sound on turns, but it felt more like mine than anything in that house ever had. I ended up in front of a little cafe with plants hanging from the windows. The kind of place Sam would never step foot into. Noisy, too cluttered, too real. I sat down, ordered a chai latte, and looked around. People were laughing, wearing colorful scarves, holding hands across tables. A girl in the corner was sketching, with charcoal on a napkin. I opened my notebook, the one I used to write in years ago. Sam had called it emotional bleeding. I wrote one sentence. I am not a problem to be solved. I started doing small things after that. I moved the bookshelves, rearranged the spines by color, not author. That would drive him crazy. I added paprika to the chicken. Extra chili flakes too, spicy enough to make me sweat. I started locking the door behind me after he came home, just to hear him knock. At night, I'd fall asleep wrapped in the quilt, curled toward the window, a space heater tucked under the bed like contraband. He started coughing more, probably to express his disapproval of the temperature of me, but he said nothing, because this wasn't about thermostats anymore. It was about ownership. One night, while I was wiping down the counter, he stood in the doorway holding a plate. You didn't rinse this properly, he said. I looked at the plate. It was clean, spotless. Really? No, I said. I did. He stared at me. You're becoming combative. No, I replied, voice calm as tea. I'm becoming me. He didn't blink. Then he stepped forward. Do you want this to work? I should have cried. That would have been expected, a natural scene, crying, regret, apologies. But I was done performing. So I just said, I think it already broke. The next day, the house was freezing. 6 for. I wrapped myself in the quilt, turned it back to 75, then walked out into the snow barefoot just to feel the ice sting my toes. Control was an invisible hand. It lingered long after it left the room, but I could feel it loosening. That weekend, I drove to my sister's place without asking. She looked surprised at the door, baby on one hip, and said, Did something happen? Yes, I said, I did. We sat at her kitchen table. I told her everything, 7 years of slow burns and unspoken rules. The silence, the shame, the way my body forgot what warmth felt like. I want to leave, I said, but I don't even know where to begin. She didn't ask why I stayed. She just took my hand and said, Begin here. When I returned home, the front door was locked from the inside. I knocked. He opened it and stared. Where were you? Out. You didn't say. I don't need to. He looked at me the way one might look at a glitch in a machine. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, I woke up early and brewed coffee, real coffee, none of that bland low-acid stuff he liked. I made pancakes and turned the heat to 76. He came down the stairs, stopped mid-step and stared. What's happening? He asked. I poured syrup and smiled. Breakfast. He didn't move. He stood there like a man in front of a burning church, watching everything he believed in start to crack. I wish I could say he screamed, flipped the table, cried, begged. But no. Sam just retreated. He began unplugging things. Light bulbs, lamps, the toaster. He moved silently, methodically. He was trying to reduce my world. But you can't shrink someone who's already expanding. That night, I turned up the thermostat again, this time to 80. And when he reset it again in the morning, I just smiled and reset it right back. No words, no tears, just heat. That week, I packed a box every night, books, journals, socks, my grandmother's quilt. I used to think leaving meant escape, but really, it meant arrival. I began labeling the boxes in my head long before I labeled them on the outside. Books. He never let me read. clothes I stopped wearing, parts of me he tried to delete. I waited until he left for work one Tuesday. He never missed work, predictable as a dial. At exactly 8:02 a.m., the car pulled out of the driveway. By 8:04, I was in motion. I didn't have a perfect plan, no dramatic monologue. No divorce lawyer waiting at the courthouse. Just a suitcase, the old quilt, my journal, and a determination that no longer needed his permission. I left the thermostat at 85 when I shut the door. It felt biblical. I drove to a small rental cabin my sister helped me find, just outside the city, the kind of place people go to write novels or cry into mugs. It had yellow curtains, worn hardwood floors, a fireplace with actual logs. Not the fake LED kind Sam liked. The first night, I stood barefoot on the floor and just let the warmth soak through my soles. I cried, not from sadness, from return. I sat on the couch with the thermostat remote in my hand. It went all the way up to 90. I didn't touch it, not because I was scared, but because I didn't need it anymore. I had already found the fire. A week passed, then two. He didn't call. He didn't come looking, of course not. That would require acknowledgement. Sam didn't chase. He reprogrammed. So I waited for the email, or the lawyer, or the manipulation to arrive in legal language. Instead, I got a message, one line from a burner number. I hope the cold teaches you something. I stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt. Because I finally saw it for what it was, a ghost. I spent my days writing. I began with old journal entries, then turned them into essays, stories about control dressed as care, routines that became cages. People started responding, first just a few readers, then hundreds. One woman wrote, I thought I was alone, he only let me wear gray too. Another, mine didn't control the thermostat, he controlled the silence. And suddenly, I wasn't just healing, I was helping. 2 months later, I went back to the house, not to see him. He'd moved out, probably into a cleaner, emptier space. I went to retrieve the last few things, art I'd stored in the attic, a broken lamp from my mother. I walked through the house barefoot like before. It was quiet, still gray. The thermostat read 68. Of course, I laughed. For the first time in that house, I laughed. I left a note on the kitchen counter, not out of kindness, out of clarity. It was never the heat. It was always the control. I found both now on my own terms. I walked out, closed the door softly. This time, the air was just air, not a message, not a mood. Just weather. In the spring, I gave a talk at a women's center. The room was warm, literally. Someone asked, how did you finally do it? After all that time, I paused. It started when I touched the thermostat, but really, it started when I realized I could touch anything. Sometimes I still think about him. I picture him walking into rooms and adjusting the settings, telling himself he's fixing the world by silencing it. But he's not my world anymore. And I don't need permission to light the fire. It's strange, the way heat becomes a memory. I remember it now, not just as temperature, but as permission, as power, as proof that I was alive inside my own skin again. The thermostat in my cabin now stays at a comfortable 72, sometimes 75 when it's snowing. Not because I need to defy anyone anymore, but because my comfort is mine to define. People think leaving is the hard part, and it is. But what comes after the rebuilding? The re-choosing of everything you were told not to trust, that's the real work. It's remembering what color your laughter is, what time you like to eat, how you like your eggs when no one is watching. It's learning to hold silence without fear in it. Months after I moved out, a legal envelope arrived at the cabin. It was thin, clinical. The divorce papers had already been filed by him. Of course, efficient to the end. There was no note, no demand, no apology. Just a spreadsheet of shared assets. A list of bullet points. I laughed again. He still thought life could be itemized. I signed without hesitation. Sent it back with no post-it, no comment. Just my signature, the last thing he'd ever control about me. A year passed. I taught a workshop on autonomy in small spaces, how to reclaim your environment. We started by moving chairs, rearranging desks. You'd be amazed how powerful it is to let someone pick their own seat after years of being placed. One woman cried when I let her open a window. That's when I realized, what I'd lived wasn't just a difficult marriage. It was erasure, but I'd redrawn myself, line by line. I planted herbs outside the cabin, basil, thyme, mint. The rosemary is stubborn, but I love that about her. I hang my grandmother's quilt over the back of the couch. and sometimes I light too many candles just because I can. One night, while baking bread, I noticed the room getting hot. I glanced at the thermostat. 78. I reached to lower it but paused. Then I laughed and left it. Sometimes people ask, would you ever forgive him? And I always say, forgive, yes, return, never. Forgiveness is for me, returning would be for him, and I've done enough living for someone else. Now I write, I teach, I sleep diagonally across the bed. I keep the windows open and the heat on. I no longer shrink to fit his weather. One afternoon, I got a message through the contact form on my writing site. No name, just a sentence. Do you still think turning up the heat fixed anything? I didn't reply, because it didn't fix things. It revealed them. I didn't turn up the heat to punish him. I turned it up to remind myself I was still here, still feeling, still alive. And now, every warm room is a revolution. They say fire destroys, they're wrong, sometimes it frees. There's a quiet that comes after escape. Not the kind that used to weigh down the walls of that house, the silence of walking on eggshells, of permission withheld, of thermostats fixed like commandments. No, this silence is alive, open, it doesn't trap me, it listens back. I've started gardening with my hands in the dirt, not because I'm good at it, I'm not. I kill tomatoes like it's a ritual, but it's the act of planting things, of saying, grow anyway. I think I understand now why so many women in stories plant things after they leave. 3 weeks ago, I met someone, his name is Matteo. He runs a bookstore near the lake. Smells like cedar and dust and coffee grounds. He asked me, carefully, if I'd like to take a walk. He didn't reach for my hand. He let it linger between us like a question. It terrified me how kind he was. Not performative kind, not textbook kind. The kind that doesn't need acknowledgement. He held doors without looking back. He never commented on what I wore. When I told him I write about freedom, he nodded and said, that's sacred work. You're brave, brave. Not too much. Not difficult, not defiant, brave. He came to the cabin once. I warned him first. It's warm here, I said. He smiled. That's kind of the point, isn't it? He never even looked at the thermostat. He complimented the quilt, asked if the rosemary had finally decided to live. I made us lemon tea strong, not diluted. He added honey without asking. That night, we talked for hours, curled into the couch like we were stitched into its seams. Not romantic, not rushed, just present. When he left, he didn't ask when he could see me again. He just said, this place feels like it's yours. And that was enough. Sometimes, I still flinch when the heat kicks on. There's a memory coded in my nervous system that tells me warmth is rebellion. But then I breathe through it. I wrap myself in it like a second skin. Because now warmth is welcome. It's something I give myself. Last week, I was invited to speak at a national women's conference. Me, Emily, who once apologized for how loud her socks were. The room was packed. Hundreds of faces, many of them hollowed out by years of being controlled, reduced, trained to be quiet and convenient. I stood on that stage, held the mic, and said, he didn't hit me. He didn't scream, he just rewrote the laws of my life until I thought 68 degrees was all I deserved. The room was silent. Then someone in the back whispered, God, and someone else clapped. Then it spread. Not a standing ovation, something better, a wave of recognition. Now, I'm writing a book. The working title, Temperature Control, How I Learned to Feel Again. There's a chapter called The Thermostat Isn't About Air. Another, When Neutral is a Lie, and my favorite, What I Wore After. I don't know if it'll be published, but that's not the point. I'm not writing for shelves, I'm writing for survivors. For women in quiet houses afraid to say I want more, for the ones who tap the thermostat and wonder if that's the first sin or the first step. Sometimes I still pass by our old house. The windows are different. The blinds are always shut. I don't wonder about him. I don't need to. That house was never really about him. It was about me. Waking up inside it. It was about the day I turned up the heat, not to burn him, but to thaw myself. Now, I sleep with the windows cracked open. I keep extra blankets in wild colors, and my thermostat, I set it each day, according to what I need. Some days 70, some days 80, some days I don't even turn it on, because I found the warmth elsewhere, in my body, in my voice, in the company I choose. In the stories I write, and in the heat I know. Longer fear. I used to think he controlled everything, but now I know, he never had the fire I did, and I always will.